Hey guys, what's going on? So today I'm going to be ranking all three of BRODEQUIN's full-length albums. I know I've reviewed all their albums, but I'd like to kind of talk about them all in one video and what I like about some more than others. I think all their albums are just about flawless, but I think that there's just some I happen to like more than others. My opinions change with this band's discography like every couple weeks, honestly. So I mean, this ranking could change within a certain amount of time. I mean, my number 3 on this list, my least favorite one, was my favorite at one point. And my number 1 was my least favorite at some point. So it fluctuates all the time, honestly. But I think that all this band's albums are fucking great. If you're really into brutal death metal, this is a band that you will love. Maybe not a band that's super accessible for more casual listeners besides their debut, but if you're not familiar with BRODEQUIN before we get started, brutal death metal band out of Tennessee, I believe. Started in the late 90s. Really ridiculously brutal shit. I mean, super low vocals, tons of blast beats, really cranked, kind of pingy snare, a lot of groove, a lot of chuggy riffs, a lot of tremolo picked riffs. Pretty raw production. All their albums are pretty raw, some more than others, but we'll talk about that. But if you've never listened to BRODEQUIN, I'll talk about what you should start with as well. But anyways, I guess we should get started without any further ado. So my number 3 spot on this list, my least favorite BRODEQUIN album, is Methods of Execution. I don't even know if I'd say least favorite, just my 3rd favorite, because this isn't like a bad album in any way. I fucking love this album, and I mean, at one point this was my favorite from them, and I could still see why this was my favorite at some point. I think just the other two the other two just kind of ended up growing on me more, but man, this is just a fucking ridiculous album. This is their last album in their discography, or at least their newest. I mean, this is pretty old. It came out like 2004, I want to say. But this probably has their rawest production. The songwriting on here is some of their strongest, especially with like the first 2 songs, Slaves to the Pyre and the how do you pronounce it? The Gridiron. This album is crazy. Super low vocals as usual. Some of the better vocals in their discography, pretty much out of all their albums, I think this might have the strongest vocals. All the vocals pretty much sound the same on each of their albums, but I think they just have the most presence on here. There's a lot of great build-up. The drums are insane on this album. They're really fast. However, one thing I kind of don't like is that the snare isn't quite as loud or pingy on here as it is on the first 2, so it's not quite as prominent, which kind of creates this weird, like, the wall of sound is a little more thin on this album as opposed to the first 2, so it kind of makes this like thin wall of sound, and with the more quiet snare, some of the grooves just don't really pop quite as much. The guitar tone it's still really cool on here, but it's a lot more scratchy and thin sounding. You know, BRODEQUIN is a band that usually has a wall of sound, and I'm not necessarily saying it's lacking on here, but it's kind of a different type of wall of sound on this album as opposed to the other 2, which are more beefy and like organic sounding. This one is still pretty organic sounding, but it's not quite as beefy. It's a little more like needly sounding, I guess is the best way to explain it. However, this one is probably their fastest. I mean, this album is fucking blistering at some points. The last track on here, Methods of Execution, the title track obviously, is a really interesting outro. It has kind of this like melody to it after there's like this super long sample. Lyrics as usual, you know, your typical medieval torture and abuse, brutal shit. It's awesome. I'd recommend this album. Maybe if you're new to this band, I wouldn't start with this one, but this one is definitely a fucking treat. I will say this though, I don't know what the fuck is going on in the album cover. Really strange album cover. But yeah, my number 3 spot goes to Methods of Execution. Nothing really about this album I dislike, just I think the other 2 are a little bit stronger personally, but if you said this was your favorite album, I wouldn't disagree with you that it's one of their best, if not their best, but their other 2 I just happen to like more. You could say any of their albums is your favorite, and I wouldn't have a problem with that in any way. But anyways, the number 2 spot goes to their most popular album, and this is one that everyone seems to start with, and I get why, and I think it's a phenomenal fucking album, and that's Instruments of Torture. I first heard this album when I was about like probably 15 years old. I wasn't super into brutal death metal yet. I liked a few bands, you know, I liked Devourment and Deeds of Flesh, but when I heard this was just like, I immediately loved the production. This is the easiest one to get into. It's probably the least raw, but that does not mean by any means that this is a clean album. because it's scooped and muddy sounding, but in a great way. If you love like Disgorge's cranial implement, you'll probably like this. But this is just pretty insane. Maybe not as ridiculous as they would become. It's not quite as fast as the other two albums. There's definitely a wall of sound on here for sure. Maybe not as much as on the second album, which I'll talk about. You already know that's going to be my number one, so I'm not even going to lie about it. But I'll talk about why when I get to that. But anyways, I think this album probably has their most memorable riffs, which is what makes this one the most accessible. Furthermore, Spinning in Agony has some great chugs, Soothsayer, Ambrosia. Every song in here is actually really memorable. Version of Nuremberg is probably my favorite on here. Sick sample at the beginning of that, it's so fucking weird. Duke of Exeter is awesome. Infested with Worms. Like, you cannot go wrong with this album. Like, I get why some people don't like BRODEQUIN because, you know, they're really raw. But, like, this album, if you're into, like, brutal death metal, I can't see what about this album there is to dislike. There's really nothing to not like about this album. I mean, maybe out of all their albums, this is, like, the most accessible, so there's people out there where this is the only one that they like, which I get, but the other stuff is more, I'd say, is more suited towards, like, just people like myself who are just really into brutal death metal and, like, just ridiculous, crazy shit. Whereas, if you're into any kind of death metal, maybe this is, like, the most extreme you'll listen to. If you're into, like, I don't know, if you're into, like, mostly OSDM and stuff and you don't necessarily listen to a lot of brutal death metal, but you like a few bands, you'll probably like this one. But I think that this is pretty much a flawless album. Quintessential fucking scooped tone. I think that the guitar tone on here is probably the best on any of their albums. It's just super juicy sounding. This album is very organic sounding. The drums really fast. Bass pretty much kind of blends into the mix. The vocals are super guttural as usual. But yeah, I can't think of anything bad to say about the album. If you're new to BRODEQUIN and you've never listened to them, I think this is the best place to start. One, it's their first album. And two, it's the easiest to get into. I think you should listen to them in order, really, and see how the band progressed. So yeah, BRODEQUIN with Instruments of Torture at number 2. And on my number 1 spot, I already gave it away. Festival of Death. Let me talk about why. First of all, this, I'd probably say, has their best tone on any of their albums. I mean, the snare is just ridiculous, and this album will filter out so many fucking normies. The snare literally, like, people will make, like, Saint Anger jokes about it if they never heard this or aren't into this type of shit. It's that kind of snare, which I guess I get why people don't like it, but I fucking love it personally. Every song on here is fantastic. While they do kind of blend in together, there's nothing wrong with that, because this album is the definition of just fun, noisy bullshit. I mean, this album is actually like caveman, which I feel like people use that term a little too sparingly. Or not sparingly. People use that term a lot, like way too much when describing a band they like. But this is actual, just like nonsensical fucking chaos, and that's what I love about it. This album is just this whirlwind of this crazy wall of sound of just blast beats with a ridiculous pingy snare, super low, nasty sounding vocals. The guitar tone, while maybe not as juicy sounding as on Instruments of Torture, I think it's like a middle ground between Instruments of Torture and Methods of Execution. It's not as thick as Instruments of Torture, but not quite as thin. This one isn't super chunky, but I'd probably say it's their most energetic. It's just really fucking fast, like I said. Just this crazy whirlwind of noise, but there's still like structure to the songs. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like Noise Grind or something like that. It's just a lot more chaotic than almost anything they've done, honestly. Mainly because of the snare. The snare is probably the most intrusive thing about the production on here, but that's what I love about it so much. I don't know if I could really give a favorite track on here, but Mazzatello and Judas Cradle, the first 2 songs on here are phenomenal. Torches of Nero. This whole thing is phenomenal, though. If you just want like around, I think this is like around half an hour. If you just want half an hour of just pure brutality and just really organic, raw, grindy shit, I think this one probably has their most grindcore influence. There's still some riffs that, you know, you can make out on here, but I think for the most part, it's just really chaotic and fun. It's just ridiculous, noisy fun, and I love it. So yeah, not Methods of Execution. I'm a fucking dumbass. Festival of Death is my favorite BRODEQUIN album, and that's why. Or at least favorite right now. Who knows, it could change within the next fucking, in the future. I don't know. That's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Maybe you could tell me your ranking of all 3 of BRODEQUIN's albums in the comments if you're into them. If not, go check them out because they fucking rule. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Bye.